Number 7. Undercover Assassin. On the morning of August 5th, 2009, Dalia DiPolito was coming back home after a gym session, but when she returned, she was given the shocking revelation that her husband, Michael DiPolito, had just been killed. Of course, Dalia wasn't really shocked by this revelation, considering she had been the one to hire a hitman to kill her husband. Dalia had met her husband Michael about a year prior to this incident. Dalia was working as an escort and was hired by Michael for her, quote, services. Eventually, Michael divorced his previous wife and ended up tying the knot with Dalia. Shortly after their marriage, Dalia started seeing her ex-boyfriend Mohammed Shihaded. Dalia was adamant that she wanted to get back together with Mohammed, but she wasn't prepared to leave her new comfortable and cushioned life behind, which is why she decided to get rid of her husband instead. She plotted ways to get Michael out of her life with Mohammed. Allegedly, she planted drugs inside of Michael's car to get him arrested, but this didn't turn out as well as she had intended. Eventually, she revealed to Mohammed that she tried to spike Michael's drink with antifreeze, but was unable to. While Mohammed thought she wasn't actually serious at first, he became rather concerned with what she might be capable of. He ended up reporting Dalia to the police, telling them that she was planning to hire a hitman. The police were hesitant at first, but they decided to work with Mohammed to catch her in the act. The police staged a meeting with Dalia and Mohammed, in which Dalia planned out the whole encounter in detail. Mohammed also tells Dalia the price that the hitman wants, and Dalia says that she agrees to everything. The whole conversation was being recorded by the police. While that would have been enough evidence, the police still decided to use an undercover agent acting as the hitman to confirm whether Dalia would be willing to go all the way. Dalia eventually confirmed that she is, quote, 5,000% sure that she wanted her husband gone. Instead of arresting her right there, they decide to wait until the day the hit was set to occur. This brings us back to the morning of August 5th, 2009, when Dalia is being informed her husband has been killed. After playing dumb with Dalia for a few minutes, the cops eventually arrest her and let her know the whole story. Dalia was eventually sentenced to 20 years in prison in 2014, although Dalia maintained her innocence. In 2017, her conviction was upheld. She is currently incarcerated at the Lowell Correctional Facility in Marion County, Florida, where she will stay until 2032. Number 6. Realtor. On March 4th, 2021, Leanne Bauman, 43, was arrested after police said they had evidence that she hired a hitman to kill her ex-mother-in-law in Lake of the Ozarks, Missouri. Leanne was a very successful realtor and powerboat racer in her hometown. Just 6 months prior to her arrest, Leanne had won a powerboating world championship and secured a $1.7 million sale as a realtor. Clearly, she had a lot going for her. But not all was well for this Missouri realtor. In 2018, she had gone through a messy divorce with her husband, with whom she had 2 daughters. Leanne was apparently very close to her daughters, and you know what they say about a mother's wrath. She was concerned with her husband's family somehow gaining full custody of her children, and on March 1st, 2021, she approached a friend, identified as CK, and asked them if they knew a hitman who could kill her ex-mother-in-law. She said that she knew it was wrong as a Christian, but she would ask forgiveness at church later. CK was alarmed by the revelation and reported it to the police immediately after their meeting. She allegedly said that she knew this was something she wanted to do. Eventually, CK arranged a meeting with Leanne and informed her that they know a guy who'll do it for $1,500, which Leanne referred to as, quote, a reasonable price. Unbeknownst to her, CK secretly recorded the whole meeting and gave it to the police as evidence. Leanne was arrested by state troopers on March 4th, just 4 days after her initial conversation with CK. Her trial is set to begin in 2022, and she faces attempted murder charges, which may lock her up for over 20 years. She maintains her innocence. Number 5. Gucci. On March 27, 1996, Maurizio Gucci, the grandson of the founder of Gucci, was shot dead outside his house after returning from work. He had divorced his wife, Patrizia Reggiani, a year prior to the incident. His wife wasn't even a suspect initially in the case, since police thought that it may have been one of Gucci's relatives fighting over his family fortune. However, a year later in 1997, one of the men involved in the murder, Ivano Saviani, was found and detained by the police. He told the police that he had hired a hitman named Benedetto Serrali on behalf of Reggiani, which was the first time her name was even brought up. Later, Reggiani was arrested. Details about what she had said to reporters and close friends slowly started coming out. She had said she wanted her husband dead numerous times prior to the killing, although she defended herself by saying it was the ramblings of a heartbroken woman. The court didn't buy her defense, though, and on November 4th, 1998, she was convicted of the murder of Maurizio Gucci and sentenced to 29 years in prison. In 2000, Patrizia attempted suicide in her jail cell but was stopped by the guards before she could make any progress. Her jail conditions improved since then, and she was even allowed to keep a pet ferret in prison. She ended up being released from prison early in October 2018 after spending 18 years in prison due to her good behavior. Have you seen the movie House of Gucci starring Lady Gaga as Patrizia Reggiani? What did you think? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 4. Lawyer needs a lawyer. On November 19th, 2020, a 43-year-old animal rights lawyer named Jennifer Emmy was arrested in Laguna Beach, California in a murder-for-hire plot involving the girlfriend of her estranged husband. On November 2nd, 2020, Jennifer and her husband were in the process of being separated. Her husband was already in a relationship with another woman, and Jennifer wasn't taking the whole ordeal too well. That day, Jennifer approached her ranch hand, 28-year-old Timothy Lindsay, and in an attempt to save her marriage, asked him to, quote, take care of her husband's new girlfriend. Timothy went straight to the Jeffco County Sheriff's Office and reported her instead. He had provided the Sheriff's Office audio tapes of the two discussing the hit. She told Timothy that if he was too nervous about carrying it out himself, he could hire a hitman to do it instead. When police asked another ranch hand, Seth McCollum, about Jennifer, he reluctantly confirmed that Jennifer had previously asked him to kill other people as well, but he didn't think much of it. After gathering enough evidence, the police prepared a report on Jennifer Emmy, which included details about her marriage, her personality, and her past criminal record, and they finally arrested her on November 19th, 2020. On August 16th, 2021, Jennifer was convicted for the murder-for-hire plot, and she was sentenced to 10 years in prison after Jennifer pleaded guilty to her crime. Number 3. Dark Web Preacher. On November 13th, 2016, 43-year-old Amy Allwine was found dead at her home in Cottage Grove, Minnesota by her son. Amy was married to Stephen Allwine, a preacher at the United Church of God, and it almost seemed like the two had a perfect relationship. Almost, that is. The FBI had secretly infiltrated a website on the dark web called Besa Mafia, where people could hire assassins to carry out hits. It was there where a user named Dog Day God hired an assassin to kill Amy. The so-called assassins ended up taking the hirer's money and ghosted him. The hirer knew personal information about Amy, including where she would be, when she left the house, and where she's driving. The FBI ended up approaching the Allwines and informed them of the plot to murder Amy. Both of them were shocked, and when they were asked if Amy had enemies, they couldn't come up with an answer. Eventually, Amy started receiving threatening texts from Dog Day God. This anonymous person knew everything about Amy and would constantly remind her that they were, quote, watching her. They accused Amy of sleeping with their husband and told her that they would take revenge. Dog Day God used an untraceable number, and it seemed they were quite tech-savvy, leaving no traces behind. It was on the night of November 13th, 2016, Stephen had taken the kids out for dinner while Amy stayed behind. When they returned, Amy was found dead by a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Stephen called 911 after discovering the phone call, but there was one thing that stood out from the phone call. It was when his son asked Stephen if he could get married now, to which Stephen replied, "I don't know, bud." While the police were investigating the quote suicide, they noticed that Amy's arm positioning didn't really match up with the way she supposedly shot herself. The police also found blood all over the bedroom that someone apparently tried to wash away. By now, they were sure that Amy was murdered and she didn't kill herself. The spouse naturally became the prime suspect. Further investigation showed that Stephen also worked as a freelance IT consultant, which would have made him tech-savvy enough to match the description of Dog Day God. After going through his electronic devices, they discovered that Stephen was having an affair. He had joined the Ashley Madison website where married men and women meet other single people. The most damning piece of evidence that Dog Day God was, in fact, Stephen was that he had deleted a code from his phone but failed to delete it from the cloud. The code matched the Bitcoin payment that Dog Day God had used to hire a hit against Amy. With that, the police had all the evidence they needed, and Stephen was arrested and put on trial for Amy's murder. After spending over a year behind bars, on January 24, 2018, Stephen was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of his wife. Number 2. Hesitation. Tan Yohui was a businessman from Guangxi, China, who was embroiled in a business dispute with a man titled Mr. Wei in 2013. Apparently, Tan decided that he didn't want to deal with the long lawsuit and thought of ending the dispute in other ways. Tan hired a hitman named Ji Guangong, and he offered him around $280,000 to kill Mr. Wei instead. She accepted, but instead of doing the job himself, he subcontracted it to another hitman for $141,000. That hitman ended up hiring another hitman, who hired another hitman, who hired yet another hitman. The final hitman in this chain of assassins, Ling Jianxi, ended up meeting Mr. Wei at a restaurant and proposed a deal where Mr. Wei would fake his own death. Mr. Wei accepted, and he even posed for a photo where he was gagged up and seemingly dead. Li Jianxi sent that photo to Tan, confirming Wei's apparent death. Shortly after the photo shoot, Mr. Wei ended up informing the police of what happened. The case went to trial in 2016, but shockingly, all 6 men were acquitted because of a lack of evidence. After a retrial in 2019, Tan Yohui, the man who called the hit in the first place, was sentenced to 5 years in prison, and the man he initially hired, Ji Guangong, was sentenced to 3 years in prison as well. Number 1. Survivor. On September 6, 2006, Susan Kuhnhausen, 51, had just finished her shift at the Providence Portland Medical Center. After returning home, she found a note left by her husband, Mike, which said he left their house to go to the beach. When Susan went up to her bedroom, she was attacked by a man hiding behind the door. The attacker, 59-year-old Edward Haffey, had been hired by Susan's husband to kill her. The hitman attacked Susan with a hammer, but Susan was trained in self-defense, something the attacker wasn't prepared for, and Susan managed to compose herself and tackle Edward, pinning him against the wall. After choking her attacker, Susan attempted to escape her house but was stopped by the hitman. She bit the hitman in an attempt to leave traces of her on him so that he could be caught if she died. The bite caught him off guard, and Susan managed to climb on his back and grab onto his neck for dear life. She put him in a chokehold until she was sure he wouldn't move again, and after he was down, Susan grabbed his hammer and ran to the neighbor's house to call 911. When the police arrived at Susan's house that night, they found a note in the attacker's pocket which said, "Call Mike," linking the husband to the attack. The hitman was Mike's co-worker, and the two worked at an adult video store. Mike was arrested the next day in Oregon, and Susan filed for divorce. The court proceedings began on August 30th, 2007, which was when Mike pleaded guilty to the attempted murder. Mike was only sentenced to 7 years in prison, which was partially due to the fact that he pleaded guilty, but never made it out. Just 3 months before he was set to be released, Mike died in prison from cancer. Thanks for watching. Who was the dumbest person in this video? Let us know in the comments, and if you enjoyed it, be sure to hit subscribe for more. See you next time on The Bad Badger.